everybody. Welcome to the Kirklees Council Children's Scrutiny panel. I'm just going to do a quick round of introductions. Remember, so I'm Andrew Marchington, Kirklees Councillor, Chair of the panel.
Canuck, Councillor, member of the panel.
Paul Davis, Councillor, member of the panel.
Morning, I'm Elaine Shane, Service Director for Family Plant Child Protection.
Hello, I'm Joanne Sanders, Service Director for Learning and Early Support.
Good morning, I'm Mark Ritzel, Head of Education Outcomes. Steve Cole, Head of Corporate Parenting.
Tony Bonley, volunteer co-op team with a background in teaching looked after children.
I'm Viv Kendrick, I'm the Cabinet Member of the Children's and Young People Services, and I'm here as an observer.
Dale O'Neill, volunteer co-op team.
Paul White, Councillor, panel member.
Richard Smith, Councillor, panel member.
Alan Summers, statutory co-op team, as Chair of Government of Huddersfield New College.
Helen Dillway, Government Officer.
Right, we're on to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Those who were here at that meeting are correct for the meeting. We approve those minutes then. Okay. Item 3, any members of the panel interest to declare? Thank you. This is a meeting that is held in public. There's no reason for that to be to exclude the public from this meeting. Okay. There are no members of the public here, so no public questions. So we're on to item 6, number of children in care. Steve, it's Richard's report.
This is a report that's been requested on a regular basis, the Children's Scrutiny. It's providing information regarding age, number, ethnicity of children in our care. And the panel has also asked that we provide some additional information regarding the monitoring of children who are placed outside of the Kirklees area, which is contained within this report.
Okay. Members of the panel, we've got questions about the report. Yeah, Linda.
Can I ask you about the reduction in the number of children who are accommodated outside the area? There's been a reduction over the last 6 months or so. All of that reduction seemed to come in the last month between May and June, and I just wondered what it was that had happened at that point, if a single thing that had caused that reduction.
In terms of the reduction, if you went back and we say within the report, over the last 2 years we've had a reduction which is on page 10 of the report in terms of the overall numbers of children in care. And we've also, the last 2 years, had this reduction in children placed more than 20 miles away, down from 127 down to 89 now. The recent reduction, sometimes we just get things around age, where children get to a certain age, and then placements come to a natural end. Sometimes difficulties in external placement, and we manage to bring those young people and place them closer to home. So I think if I had to go through the report, I'd probably give you some broader context regarding that. But yeah, it's not a specific instance. This, just to clarify, we said this obviously relies it's a new panel. We have not been saying, oh, we have X amount of children placed more than 20 miles, so we're going to bring them back regardless of what's happening. Each case is unique. And as we saw through the report, you can see that some of the children have been placed outside of the area for a significant amount of time, so that's their home. So we're not just going and saying, oh, we now have a foster placement in Kirklees, so we bring you back from that one. Each case is considered individual.
I just wondered if there had been that cluster, whether there was something that...
You just sometimes get certain, over time, certain age groups, etc. just happen. So we have a group at the moment, as we're moving forward over the next 3 to 6 months, for example, in external residential care, where they come into a certain age, that will be moving into semi-independence. It just happens when they were originally placed as a group.
Just a little bit off script. I wanted to ask a question about foster carers and how we're getting on with recruitment. So I know there's a constant recruitment drive. I see a lot on
Yeah.
social media and other places about trying to recruit.
Yeah.
How are we getting on in Kirklees?
Yeah, we're starting to make some progress. We're getting interest. I mean, the Kirklees picture mirrors the national picture. Nationally, the Department for Education say there's a lack of around 10,500 fostering households. And the most recent information from the DFE, which was last year, shows a decline for a whole number of reasons nationally in fostering households. And we've seen some of that in recent years in Kirklees, but we have held our own. If we were doing figures in preparation for the recent inspection, and when we looked at our number of households at the time of the last inspection, we have actually increased a little. The other thing we've done a specific piece of work on to try and ensure children cared for in family settings is that whole thing around connected persons care. So at the moment, as a local authority, we fund around 98 children to be placed with kinship care, and some of them arrangements will then turn into special guardianship. So the number of children in Kirklees who are cared for in foster care overall, it actually increased by 9-10% since the time of the last inspection. So less children in residential care, more children in foster care. I think the overall percentage of our children in care and foster care currently is around 75%, up from 66% at the time of the last inspection. That's a higher proportion when you include that connected persons foster care. That's a higher proportion of statistical neighbours and a higher proportion of the national average. So we have got this focus on family settings and a real focus on that. We're quite clear that some children do have to be cared for in residential settings, but the majority we try to get a family setting. If you look at our external residential placements, just since the beginning of last year, we've reduced those from around 53 placed in external residential down to around 32. So yeah, we've got a real focus on family settings, fostering, trying to recreate that family home environment rather than residential.
On page 13, it says some of our children out of area are facing semi-independent homes. What is a semi-independent home?
Yeah. When children, young people come to the age of 17, 18, semi-independent homes are preparation for leaving care. So these settings are not like children's homes. Young people are given more autonomy, and we have contractual arrangements with those providers. There are a whole range of providers out there for semi-independence. Some of them we contract with, some of them we don't. So the difference between semi-independent and a registered children's home is that registered children's homes are overseen and monitored by Ofsted as individual homes. Semi-independent homes are monitored through contractual arrangements by ourselves.
One further question. What is in place to prevent any of our children being placed in unregistered housing?
Right. In terms of unregistered, just to go back to the previous bit, what we have is we don't use bed and breakfast, so we don't place our older young people in bed and breakfast. As I just said, children's homes registered by Ofsted, semi-independent homes currently, and this is something we know from discussions with people at the DFE is being looked at, semi-independent homes are deemed not registered, so unregistered. So the contractual arrangement of how we monitor them is important through our commissioning arrangements. So I know there's particular concern around semi-independent, which are deemed not registered with Ofsted. So if there are issues, particularly with some providers who set up in our district who don't actually care for Kirklees young people, but then contractual arrangements are down to individual authorities. So it's up to us to monitor those contractual arrangements.
I know that the DFE has sent a letter to all heads of children's services about this particular issue.
Yeah. But when the DFE letter came out, there were some authorities who were placing young people, say, of a younger age, even under the age of 16, in settings that weren't registered. That's something we do not do. There were some authorities around the country where children under the age of 16 were not placed in Ofsted registered settings. So fostering is Ofsted registered, the whole regulatory framework. Registered children's homes, you've got your whole regulatory framework. There were one or two authorities around the country where children under the age of 16 were being placed in unregistered settings. So you're correct, the Chief Inspector, Amanda Steelman, sent a letter came out saying to authorities that you must make sure when you're placing children.
I think it's excellent that we don't, but my question was, is there anything in place to absolutely prevent it happening?
Yeah, if we're making an external placement, for an example, if there was a call through today and we had a 14-year-old young person and we were looking for a placement, we have a placements team. So we have the White Rose framework, which operates across Yorkshire and Humber with the registered providers. So we check the Ofsted grading, we check the latest inspection report, and if colleagues in other authorities, if it was had a child placed there, we bring them, say, what do you make of this provider? So we have that commissioning arrangement, and what you're saying is absolutely correct. There were some authorities where young people were being placed in provision that wasn't registered.
Can I just confirm, no young person is placed out of area without my agreement, so I am very robust in the decision making around the circumstances that they're being placed.
That's really assuring, thank you.
Yeah.
Richard.
Thanks. A couple of questions, please. The first one's really easy. Special guardianship, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago. Does that reduce the numbers in foster care? Or is it included within it, or is it separate? So, or can somebody move from one box to another, and statistics need a good understanding?
You can move. Yeah, we have the numbers of what we fund. So as a local authority, if a connected persons foster carer, or even a mainstream foster carer, with the connected persons foster carer, we have in them conversations about this child doesn't have to be looked after. So if it's the grandparent or the aunt or the uncle who's caring for the young person, we have them conversations about special guardianship. What people have got to be aware of around special guardianship, because the young person is not in that looked after children cohort, as a local authority we do financial assessments, there's national guidance, so we are currently supporting, I think it's just under 300, around 300 children in special guardianship arrangements. But there is, in the legislation around that, there's a whole series of legislation around how we monitor and support. But what it does for the young person and the child and the family, it takes away the level of state intervention and the council being wholly involved in the child's life. But we still have to monitor and we know special guardianship.
It was more so I could understand what the figures meant. Yeah. The other question, I'm quite surprised actually by this. Children looked after age and gender breakdown on page 12. In almost every age group, there was significantly more girls than boys.
I think it's the wrong way.
And I'm surprised by that. If it's true, which is starting to make me wonder, I was just thinking that this was correct, and it might be. Either way, I would have thought that those graphs would have been very similar. Do you know why? There was such a very, I thought, significant difference between boys and girls, whichever way around it happens to be. I don't really understand that.
I mean, there is normally a gender differential. I mean, I would agree with it. Normally see it normally the other way around. So I would need to check
so even excluding the fact that might be an error, I'm not so sure whether I'm bothered about that. I'm just really concerned. Why is there a big difference between boys and girls? I don't understand that. Do you know as a...
Historically, when that question's come up, whenever I've worked in this arena with children in care, I think it's been around there is a whole thing around gender and how young people are responded to, how children are responded to, and I think that particularly difficult teenage boys, there's always been a higher proportion of difficult teenage boys in care, and that was always a national thing. So, like I say, them colours for the really grasping together, I'll get that checked.
Any questions?
One more, really quickly. You said that there's a small number of young people in youth custody. I'm interested to know, do we still maintain a relationship with them while they're in custody? Do we support them through the criminal justice system?
Yeah, the regulations regarding that changed about 3 years ago. What used to happen if a young person from the community went into youth custody, so they wouldn't have that children in care status. There's something called the LAPSO regulations, which when that young person's in custody, they're now covered by the LAPSO regulations, so they become like a child whilst they're in custody. So yeah, them arrangements would change. That's what used to happen, is a young person from the community would go into custody, and if they didn't have social work involvement, they wouldn't be tracked to child and care. That's now different. They're tracked through the child and care system.
So
visits, exactly, yeah. And we have our arrangements for monitoring that through the youth offending team, and we also then have the links with the leaving care team. So if a young person, we do have some young people who can get significant sentences. So you can have a young person who goes into custody age 16, 15 and is coming out, so the leaving care team would also be involved in terms of what's happening for that young person when they leave custody.
For this group of children, educational outcomes in terms of how we track and know them out, and obviously fits within education, but just want to try and understand how we look at it, and also link to that the issue of exclusions and whether exclusions are disproportionate in this area in terms of schools, etc. And it's probably more, I think,
looking at exclusions on the next slide.
Sorry. So we'll leave that one. But educational outcomes, I'm interested to see how we work together.
So the answer is yes. We have a virtual school for looked after children, and there's a head teacher of that virtual school and a whole team. Certainly they report directly to the corporate parenting board, but there's some detailed head teacher reports, and there's a governing body. So yes, in terms of those educational outcomes, they're compared with at a national level, but that team works closely with the social workers, so it's very closely tracked, and both things need to be stable, all those things need to be stable for youngsters to achieve, and so it is a very clear focus. We've got a very tenacious head teacher who keeps oversight, so happy to share a head teacher's report if that's helpful to triangulate.
Well, it's one of those links with corporate parenting boards, so Richard might be able to help us out. I understand it, the reports come through to corporate parenting board, there should be a lot of scrutiny about that particular issue going on. I know Viv and I discuss educational outcomes for care leavers as well as part of the review. So I think one of the things, so we're not duplicating work, it's being satisfied that the corporate parent board is scrutinising that. I think, because otherwise we're going to end up with the same reports.
And that's available, Chair, in the public domain for anybody to access, so if it's a matter of interest for...
That's what we do need to do. I mean,
sure.
sorry, this is slightly off the agenda, isn't it? When we go come onto the agenda plan, look at those positive outcomes for care leavers across the patch. The best way to measure that. Any other questions or comments on the children care report? Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Steve. So, item 7, page 17, educational landscape in Kirklees. So, prefer to
Yeah, we'll do it together.
Yeah, we'll do it together, but
Teamwork.
as per
Morning, everybody. I think this opens a good time in terms of three things here. Really. So one is the continuation of what we've done previously as Scrutiny, talk about how well we are doing in terms of outcomes and Kirklees, and we have presented previously to Scrutiny about that landscape here. The other part is digging deep into some of those areas I think that are really important for us to consider over the coming years. And then some ideas about how collectively we can look at data such as attendance and exclusion to make that more relevant to yourselves as a panel over time, and some ideas around how we can develop that relationship better. So they're the three aspects I just want to sort of outline, if that's okay. Firstly, there, Kirklees sort of bottom quadrant in terms of outcomes across lots of key stages. That's kind of important for us to bear in mind. So quadrant D in many of our indicators, key stage 1, 2, 3 and 4, very strong at post 16. But within our 6,000 children that attend all those schools, there's some really, really strong practice that's out there that's making a difference. But we feel generally, when we've looked at the data in detail, there's some really key areas that do come out. So, and that forms part of the learning strategy that we're beginning to develop. And that has been to Scrutiny previously, but I want to talk a little bit about that because that helps you understand why we're looking at certain areas. So certainly communication and literacy is a key thing across for all children. In fact, if you went to Hudson University, I'm sure we'd find some lecturers talking about literacy and communication as a real key aspect of a lifelong skill. So part of our strategy is looking at the data that tells us there are some key parts of our data across the schools tells us there's some real need. Could well be right down at very early years as well as right at the key stage 4. So that's telling us about our landscape. We also feel that mathematics is a key area for equipping young people for that real ability to engage in the workplace and engage in life. And there's some pockets at key stage that we've identified too that's going to be a real driver. But we also think that work in the classroom, that work within schools and other settings isn't going to make a difference unless our leadership and governance is stronger. And when we've analysed our own reviews with schools, when schools have fed back, when we've looked at Ofsted reports over the years, we're beginning to identify there are some areas, common areas, that we really need to strengthen. And some of them, you won't be surprised, are national issues as well, about governance across the country, about to what extent are our leaders really equipped, and sometimes it's about recruitment and retention, which isn't just exclusive to Kirklees. It is a national issue about have we got enough teachers and have we got enough people stepping up to being a head teacher and other leadership roles. So that also forms part of our strategy because we feel there would be a default, I think, without really addressing what strong leadership looks like and sharing that and identifying where there are weaknesses to build that up across the years. The other aspects, the fourth aspect, and we're going to touch on it briefly in a while, is the concept of reducing exclusions. I suppose it's a nice paradox. You reduce exclusions because your attendance improves. So there's something around there that we are beginning to do, and I'll come to that in a second with secondary colleagues. And the fifth strand, really, that really helps us think about our strategy is about the outcomes for our disadvantaged learners, whoever they may be in different contexts. Some contexts in some Kirklees schools, it may well be children with special educational needs who are the disadvantaged. In other areas of the schools, it may well be children on pupil premium, it may be unlooked after children, it may be boys versus girls. So it's really important that we work with schools so they identify themselves, what their barriers are, where they are, and find creative solutions collectively to overcome those for those disadvantaged learners. Because obviously, as you may well know, there's a huge amount of money allegedly out to make sure that disadvantaged children get those extra support. So our strategy is based on that data, and in there is also things important to realise that within every school there are structures that have been around for many years that do work for a lot of children, that do give them those opportunities and do get them the outcomes. What we want to look at is amending and fine-tuning and changing the parts of those structures in schools that do need developing, that do need some extra support and ideas. So in terms of that strategy, I think it's important to look outwards at three key things that this panel we may well be coming back to update you and try our support in terms of how well we're doing. One is certainly the offset framework that does sit constantly, has done for many years now, in guiding schools and helping us think about what are the key things for government. And I think the general view out there nationally has been that the schools and lots of government bodies and educators welcome the new framework, saying that there are some opportunities where they are looking more at those needs of the disadvantaged, and the focus on the framework has been now more of what are you doing in terms of your curriculum to meet the needs of different learners. What's well-being like for your staff, without taking away the rigour about educational outcomes, which you think about as well for a lot of disadvantaged learners. Making sure they get some great GCSEs is going to be one way that they can hopefully take their place in life. So I think that will be important for the next year to think how that's shaping with our schools, how schools responding, taking advantage of that change, and what our data tells us about how well schools are doing under that framework. I myself, I'm a lead inspector for Ofsted, so it's kind of interesting for me having that dual role of seeing that from one point of view, but also how our schools are looking at that. The second part, I think, is the Timpson review, that I think has sometimes been a little bit lower key in the last few months, but that's been a really important piece of work that the Government Health Commission to look at alternative provision. And some of the questions that have been asked over the years have been about accountability. How effective is our alternative provision? Why do we need it? Is it meeting the needs of those vulnerable children? For whatever reason, mainstream education isn't working for them. And that's come about also from Ofsted looking very carefully about the regulation of that provision around nationally. So there's something in that Timpson review as well that's recommending 30 key things, and lots of them are about funding. There are 30 recommendations. And a lot of them are about making sure that if it doesn't work for children in mainstream, we have to make sure that the quality they get in alternative provision is as good as it can be. A bit like we were just talking there about the children may well be non-registered homes and so forth. So there's a rigour around there. Now those proposals will be, the government said they're going to take those forward, and in there is an aspect of how schools may well be held to account for any children they terminate school. That's out there for discussion and debate, I suppose. But also there's the question of funding for alternative provision from the Timpson review. If we do have systems out there where the needs of some children are met, to what extent are we making sure that those leaders in that provision, and often those teachers and head teachers are working with our most disadvantaged, complex children in society. To what extent are the systems allowing them to do that? So those two areas I think are important. They're kind of entwined that will help us with our strategy about improving outcomes for children in Kirklees. And then there's also some of the things it's there just to look at how curriculum changes and how things stay the same. So the new sexual education guidance that's been out there is really important for us to keep an eye on, because there isn't a great deal of change in that guidance. But out there nationally, there has been some controversy around different people's interpretation. And in the report I know I've outlined how Kirklees, we are working alongside our head teachers and schools and governing bodies in making sure we have a clear strategy that puts the children at the heart of it and make sure there's some continuity. So those are the key areas in the report that talks about how the strategy will work. But most importantly, in terms of learning strategy, we were very aware that it's okay having a structure in a piece of paper. To what extent is it living? So we felt that this year, 2019-20, is also a year of research and putting together what is the best practice for mathematics. Where in Kirklees are those fantastic schools that are delivering outcomes for Key Stage 1 learners, and where is it out there nationally? There are 3 research schools in this area, and so we felt very importantly we need to tap into the best practice. The third strand of that is the Education Endowment Foundation, that do a lot of work about research and getting best practice. So we are linked with that organisation for this year to really find out, to work with schools and say, actually, that is being proved to be a really effective way of delivering the outcomes we want. What we're conscious of There's a big market out there, people presenting to schools, try this idea for improving your maths, what about this for doing the reading? So we're conscious that we want to work alongside schools as partners to find the best way. So by this time next year, we're in a position where the learning strategy in literacy, in mathematics, in leadership, in governance is looking at the very, very best practice so that our schools will be confident in delivering that. And it will be bespoke as well, because the literacy that's needed in a rural school in the Home Valley may well be different to what literacy needs at Key Stage 4 in Batley might well be. So we're making sure that our schools are working autonomously, we're working in partnership around there. The bit that I think is quite important that's already started working is the work on secondary exclusions. If I can just go on to that, Chair. And secondary heads came together, having looked carefully over the last year about teaching and learning, about the curriculum, and then came to a collective view that the exclusions in Kirklees were far too high, that the system itself needed some real adaptation and changes with a really collective moral purpose. So that piece of work has been going on since January, where we've had 2 working groups from head teachers and beyond, looking at 2 strands. One is the system that we have, and some of the data is about early intervention when children get referred to a panel. If children, it doesn't quite work, they may go to something we call BACS, which is Behaviour and Attendance Collaborative. So across schools, they may sit in a panel like this and say, what's the fresh start for an individual child? What's the best needs? There's also a third panel, which is a fair access panel that looks at permanently excluded young people. How do we collectively find the best pathway for them? So that structure is in need of finding the best practice. So one working group of head teachers has looked carefully at that, and they're presenting those ideas of best practice, including going to look at other local authorities as well to find it. The other working group, and we looked at also beyond just teaching, we looked at education psychologists, we had social care representatives in there, family support groups. What is the best way we can skill our workforce in schools? Because arguably there may well be some needs that are unmet, but it's our responsibility to give our staff in schools the best training they can to meet the needs of trauma, to meet the needs of children who have attachment issues, to also meet the needs of children with social, emotional and mental health needs, which is a big issue nationally. So that working group is looking very carefully at how we can use our training methods we already have, that includes regional and national, to best meet the needs of schools. So those 2 are our key bits of work that we started already. I'm really pleased there's been some real impact on there as well through some of the work on reducing exclusions. But that's going to be a key piece of work around that kind of thing. Maybe in the future it may be good for panel members to come out and put a programme to meet some of these head teachers, go into some of the settings in schools and see where there's been some successes, and perhaps bring head teachers into here to perhaps help us report back about the findings, how things are going, so that we have a generally joined up bit of work that we do across Kirklees.
Thank you, Alfred. Right, so we've got lots of questions about the report. I think what we need to do, because this is, I think, the first time we've seen the strategy, what we potentially need to do is think about how we are going to monitor some of the things that you've talked about, how we're going to engage with that. So panel members can think about, when we're asking questions about particular areas, it's with a view to how we're going to engage with that, how we're going to work out. Like some of the other discussions about the information we need to make sure we're getting the outcomes for our children and people that we want. So is that okay for taking that particular discussion? So Richard and then Paul and then Amanda.
I'll try and be fairly brief. I've got quite a lot I could say about this. I could talk for a long time about this. I'm going to try and be concise. I'm also a dad of 2 young kids, so I've got a lot of experience with this. So you talk about reducing exclusions, okay? Now, you've also talked about disadvantaged learners. In one respect, it worries me when you talk about this. I accept that it's a noble thing to do, and I accept that disadvantaged learners need more support. But what I have experienced in my own life is that there are kids in schools at the moment who are disrupting classes, and there is one kid in a class of 28 or 30 it's causing an awful lot of bother for the other 27, 28, 29 kids. And I moved my kids last year mostly because of this issue to another school. So there needs to be an understanding of, yes, there are kids who require more support. I'm glad you mentioned the teaching report. I'm glad you mentioned alternative provision of education, etc. But there needs to be a really good understanding of where the line is drawn. Now, exclusion needs to be a last resort, and there are many things that I agree with in the sentiments of the things you described, but we need to keep mindful of the fact that there are other kids who will be disadvantaged if disruptive kids are left in class and disrupting their other education. So we need to keep mindful of that. And that's really important. And it's all very well and good talking about the 2% that have got a lot of issues, and I fully support they need extra attention, etc.
But you think that monitoring?
Well, this is quite. This is the heart of what I've just been listening to for the last 10 minutes, and it worries me. It worries me if this council is focusing solely on the excluded kids and not on the 99.8% of other kids. Now, the other point I want to make: my kids go to local schools, and they never get homework ever. Right? My son is 9.5, 10. I'm not going to mention which school he's at, but he went to another school until 18 months ago. Never gets homework. So it happens that he's well above where he should be.
So does that question relate
feeds
to the
into
report?
the whole ethos of what we're listening to?
Can we think about the exclusion stuff first then, Rich?
Okay. I'm a bit passionate about this because I just see a concept of...
So if it's okay, if we look at the exclusion stuff, because there's a couple of bits of reports about exclusion. So what I think, and other members want to bring this, I think what Richard raised about balancing up the needs of children who are being excluded against the others against the needs of the other members and the impact. So we want to look at how are we as a panel going to monitor how that's been done, that balance between the needs of the majority of others and the needs of the others.
I asked the question of my old head teacher last year. I said, how long are you going to tolerate this kid chucking chairs around, disrupting, practically 40% of every lesson before you chuck him out of school, or we can't chuck him out? So alright, fine. So, sign the forms, I'm leaving. That's what happens, and that's what happens.
Right, so what we need to know is where else is that happening, how is it dealt with, what are the mechanisms, perhaps we've all got personal experiences, it's how do we monitor that.
So I think, I just want to reiterate what Harpreet's already said, it's about getting it right for every single child. So, youngsters who are high attainers, that's why we're focusing on curriculum, and some of it's not what we do as a local authority. We have a very different role. We have to work with our schools, and I think that there's some real value in enabling some of our head teachers to come and explain some of the things that they're doing. We have some exceptional practice across this district. What we want to be able to do, and that's a role that we can fulfil, and you can help us to do that, is very much about how we create those collaborative arrangements and making sure that we're harnessing things that are working well and evidence-based research.
We're focusing on the exclusions. So you've got a child, potentially disruptive child in class at the age, so they're on the verge of exclusion. So what things are happening to meet the needs of that child, but also working with the other children in that group and peer groups of stuff, so you get overall better outcome.
So that could be a good suggestion of how that's a really good way of monitoring the future. So if we've said this at Skip, we're training up our staff in all schools having access to training so they can better meet the needs and make sure the curriculum is bespoke. That could be a good way of finding out to what extent are fewer referrals made out, the exclusions have gone down, schools' own behaviour data and things like that as well.
Just follow the exclusions, so I'll bring some others in, I'll bring you back in, Richard.
Yeah, just specific exclusions, a few other things.
Let's focus on this to start off.
There's other exclusions. From my perspective, having talked, the Education Learning Partnership Board, talked to heads, and was actually this week in the schools, even if I was talking ahead there, this is very much about early intervention. This is very much about providing partnership services across the patch to children at an early age. The fact is, and please don't get me wrong here, I don't think we resolve this simply by actions at the secondary level. You have to put actions in the secondary level, but here we're talking about having an ability as a parent to look at what are we doing when children are going into school, what are we doing to support teachers there who can identify very early, in conjunction with our colleagues here, where there are problem cases. And the fact that exclusions, a huge percentage, are children with mental health issues, SEN, looked after children. So, we've got ability fairly early on to do that. So I'd be interested in understanding what we can do and what you guys can do in terms of bringing those partners in and working at that early intervention stage to help us and help address some of the issues that Rich is talking about. Because I sympathise as a parent. You don't want, and I've taught in primary school and I've been in a class with a chef 50 years across the classroom. So that's the bit I'm interested in.
That's really, thanks for sharing that.
So can we just bring other questions about this area and then you can respond? So Andy, you've got,
I've got one in exclusions now.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Paul?
Well, I did want to comment on exclusions because I really welcome the fact that this report majors on it, because I've been a chair of governance for many, many years, and it's something that is a topic that comes up regularly in terms of practice within Kirklees, within the country, and a sort of a fear that practice is very poor in other schools. It may be true or maybe not true, but in particular possible areas within Kirklees, and that it's being abused, not by schools. So, Richard's point, absolutely, I agree with that. My children went through school and there were all these stories of inappropriate behaviour not being really dealt with at high school in particular. So, the fact that you're majoring on it, I think as a panel, I want to see how this moves forward in terms of how you're tackling it within the borough. I think linked to that is this off-roading as well, and whether or not that is a common practice within Kirklees. I have anecdotal information that in certain areas it is, and in other areas it's not. It might be untrue.
Be careful. If we've got specific stuff about experience, that's fine, because we've got lots of experience. It's about how we use that experience to scrutinise what we do.
Exactly. So, yes, I think both, that's what I'm saying, is both of these areas are areas that I think as a panel we want to monitor and have more information. So more information first in terms of what the practice is that's going on in the borough, and then monitor it in a way that improves practice for outcomes for the children. And that's basically what I wanted to say.
I just wanted to ask, if a child, rather than being excluded, is sent to another school for a week, which I know is really effective practice, does that statistically count as an exclusion or not because they're still in attendance?
No, it's not permanent exclusion. We do manage group, yes, you're absolutely right. So we have two collaboratives of North and South that do that work collectively, led by head teachers and senior leaders, where often the school may feel actually our needs aren't being met, and there's a really strong system of collaboration. With data being brought about that young person was following, and then often it's a 6-week programme with some really clear targets and support if need be. So that sort of data would be really useful, I think, for us to say to what extent is that effective. So we can bring that.
I just want to clarify the reason I got quite. The reason I want to ask the question was specifically because of how you focused so much on reducing exclusions. Now that's a really good thing to do, so long as it doesn't do the things that I described. That's all I was getting at. And the reason why it struck a nerve with me is because I spoke to someone who's very close to you professionally about 6 or 8 months ago, and they said to me that the worst thing you can do is exclude the child. And I accept that. And it's not something any of us want to see. But the other things I've already described that I won't go into again don't justify first.
And what we all need, we want the best for all of our children, but we need to understand that sometimes there are conflicting, the needs of one child might be very different from another. There's conflicting priorities.
Yeah.
And what we need to, and what we absolutely need to do is look at the mechanisms that are in place and what the impact of what we're doing has on the whole.
Can I say one final thing?
Yeah.
That, you know, to soften what I said a little bit, in the school that I'm seeing now, there's kids who've clearly got issues outside of school that's dealt with in a really sensitive manner, and they're not actually disruptive in class, so lots of it works.
We need to do a bit about, we understand, we need to do that.
Final question as
Yeah,
well.
final points, yeah.
Very quick one. I don't know if this is the right bit, but whether it would be useful as well to understand where children are excluded, what happens to them later on in terms of impact, whether in terms of criminality, social behaviour, and that would perhaps be useful for us to understand as well.
Fine. So,
Judge,
rather than calling,
sorry.
yeah, I think it's again about the information we need to know what's going on. So that the small number of pupils who are excluded, that there's impacts on their lives, there's significant impacts, but also what's happening in the pattern as a whole. So we've got the report, and we know there's things in place, we've got the reports that come through, it's then what information do we need to check that. But also I would be, and it's this, it's small numbers with big impact, isn't it? So we need to have an idea of the scope of this to make sure. So is that okay to bring some stuff, some of the stuff back to, and perhaps the comments, getting like the other discussion we've had about getting the right data back to assure us, or to do some more investigation as well based on our experiences. Okay, right. That's the exclusions. I'll just go through this. So Amanda, we've obviously got some of the other key lines of inquiry you to explain. Amanda?
Yeah, so you haven't really alluded to it in your report, but I'm thinking of schools where English is not the first language. So in one of the schools in my ward, I've heard the head teacher say there are at least 20 other languages than English spoken at the school, and how much pressure that might put on the school in terms of the resources. So, you know, you haven't sort of mentioned that in the report, and I'm assuming it's embedded in there when you talk about various issues. But, you know, what support is there available in respect to schools where, you know, that situation occurs?
So that's a very fair question. Within the strand of improving communication and literacy, it sits very clearly within there. And because that's something that has been in schools for several years, there's some pockets of very, very good practice, but also teaching schools have a responsibility of delivering and sharing that best practice, and our schools are heavily involved in that process. So there are structures in place for schools individually to approach within the local authority, within teacher-school alliances, within which can we trust to be able to do that, so we can broker that type of work to see what is it they particularly need. But sometimes you may have a lot of young staff who just arrived and they may not have that experience of maybe changing population of the school. So it's about head teachers and governing bodies respond proactively, but the resources are out there, networks to do training. And actually, our data tells us there are some schools with really diverse school populations in terms of languages and making real practice, which is what next year's work is about, research, finding that best practice, so no head teacher feels alone and thinking, you know, I'm stuck with some real issues here. That's one of the key bits we want to do.
That encompassed in the strand you talk about communication.
Yeah, communication.
And a vulnerable group as well, because English isn't a second or additional language. You're absolutely right. It's having a lens at that group. Some of our schools do some stunning work. We do have some resource as well, funded through Schools Forum. But there's a skill base in a lot of our schools. I know very well schools in your ward. I think the important dynamic as well, which maybe isn't as prevalent in this paper, is that home to school relationship, because parents are the first educators of their youngsters, so being able to create really strong relationships, and that's something our schools do very, very well, but being able to engage home to school, it is incredibly important, particularly if there's a language barrier. So that's part of the things that we start saying. There's some exceptionally creative practice in enabling that. And if we can share that where it's having impacts,
Yeah.
that's what we'd like to do.
But I guess that sort of links into my next question, which was about the school hubs, because that isn't something that's mentioned. How well is that working? You know, are we engaging well? Does it complement what's happening at the moment?
So I think the hub arrangements are really taking some traction. I think they're in varying levels of maturity. The chair mentioned previously just last week there was an early support opportunity for partners to work together. I'd like us to be able to talk about that at future scrutiny, because it should complement educational outcomes.
Yeah.
The work
I want to look at that on the agenda, because I think it comes under early support strategy.
Yes.
Some of that. I've got it on somewhere in the agenda, but yeah, it's probably.
Thank you.
Dale Walland, have you got any particular things about? Yeah, Dale.
On page 19, on bullet point 3, there's something I've read before about inconsistent performance of school leaders and governors. As I said, I've read that before. But my question is, what data supports this inconsistent performance, and inconsistent performance relating to what?
So certainly in terms of outcomes, because that came from the outcomes report, and the data, all the different key stages. So schools will set targets, and governing bodies will look at those individual schools to how their children will perform over that time. And that's where that scrutiny comes from within the schools. So what it said is that meeting those needs of those children.
It's an analysis of obviously one of the things that we are reviewing all the time is how schools are under the Ofsted inspection framework. That's why it's really relevant, because there is a new inspection framework starting from September. So you'll see that there's a judgment made around the quality of leadership and governance, and so it's underpinning that, and it's what can we do? It's a conversation we've been having with the system around how we might be able to support better training. It's a huge ask to be a school governor, as many of you will bear testament to. And it's about how we support improvement, and there's a range of strategies that we've employed, but we need to do better. So
your answer really is that it's a judgment. There is no actual. If you're setting targets and you look at the results, you're not exactly examining the performance of school leaders. You're looking, but what you said was it's a judgment of what has happened. That's what
the external performance is judged via Ofsted under the Ofsted framework. So it's about how we all work with that.
I will make a comment on this, and I will go through my anecdotes. As a concern, I'd be interested in how the new Ofsted framework is working for our children and our school members. Great, we've got a lead inspector here. I've got a specific example of inconsistent, and this is over a period of time, inconsistencies between Ofsted judgments and DFE practice and subsequent stuff on. The frustration I have as a parent and a teacher is when you raise what you believe to be legitimate concerns, the barriers come up. It's a power issue, and so I think even when you've got good judgments of good school leadership and governance, because the outcomes have not always been what Ofsted are looking for. That's been hopefully that's changing in the new framework.
We can bring that to
it's making sure that we've got good leadership and governance in schools where you've got pupils dealing with other things, and also making sure that's the case. For example, we get schools which look like they're getting good children performing well, but they're not performing as well as they ought to be doing, and those are making those judgments as well.
So it's being able to triangulate exactly that. It's not just looking at an Ofsted outcome. That'd be absolutely the wrong thing. And it comes back to, I think, the point Harker's been making. It's got to be evidence-based. So where Scrutiny are asking us for data, I think that's the absolute nub of it. Otherwise, we get into anecdote, don't we?
Well, fine. So, I've got a particular bit of that which I just think is ridiculous, and someone needs to be looking at it. So, because I'm perfectly involved with it, I won't do it now. When I've done that, I'll bring it to panel. I'll tell you what it is, not today. It's fascinating. Right. So, Richard, you got
Just talk about evidence. Can I just mention one thing that just found out here, and it's on page 19, bullet point 2, about the attainment figures. Now, I don't know how a small team of people like yourselves can change that in an area the size of Kirklees. So please don't take that the wrong way that I'm highlighting this, because there are thousands of members of staff in schools. But it worries me that is so poor. I don't know how to change it, but I think that is the bit out of the whole report that should be worrying us as a scrutiny panel. And I think that, I'm quite sure that it's not the only reason. But when my family members in other parts of the country at 7, 8, 9 years old come home with stacks of homework every week, and my kids come home with absolutely nothing, there must be a correlation somewhere. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Well, there is evidence about that.
Chair, just to respond, we did for the first time in 2 or 3, 4, 5 years bring through the cabinet process and to scrutiny that annual quality standards performance report. We obviously, some outcomes are not yet published. We wait with bated breath for those in August, but we will do that again, and it won't be the very small team at the local authority, because that's not the way the system works. It's sector-led improvement. It's what we can do to convene that. I think the words that have been used in the report are it's going to take a high level of collaboration, which we think we've got.
What I was meaning by that was, what I was just trying to say was, I'm not blaming Kirklees staff, that's what I was meaning. I was just saying we need to look at that.
We do. We're highly ambitious, and we should be in and there's no reason why we couldn't be in the top quartile. So having a strategy with some clear milestones that we can collectively monitor, how do we direct resource, time, energy and focus at the right things to make it work for our youngsters?
It's a perennial issue, because Jeff Alvey, cabinet member for education, Kat Harris, Vic Kendrick, it's been a cyclical issue for Kirklees. There's times when we report performance, with our nearest statistical neighbours, it's not been good, it's been better. What I personally think I could do with no apologies is some longitude. What's happened over time? Why have things? What's the underlying stuff that's changed that? What can we all be doing to make sure that things are better? And if there's particular external factors that are affecting what's going on with Kirklees, how do we challenge that? And we did have a conversation with Mel when she was there about some of. If you look at parts of the country where there's been massive improvements in there's been specific things done. But just can Kirklees do it, or are there other issues around that?
Exactly that, which is why we need a learning strategy, and we're doing that long-term analysis. You're absolutely right.
For us to look at actually what's happened at each of those parts.
Victoria's got a good point. I was going to raise it very much, a big thing that makes me feel a little bit more optimistic is the measured approach in terms of not going to wait 5 years for strategy, but we work on the strategy rather than a piecemeal. I think the worst thing we can do is just do a scanning and just start in piecemeal, because it'll be a disaster. And so I think that makes sense. So if we can do, if we can turn that into something that we go back and. Well, I guess my question is, what can you give us as interim reports on strategy? Not 12 months down the line, because clearly we want to have an understanding if we feel we're going the right way as well. I think that's something that needs to be thought about.
Linda.
Just very briefly, really, to echo in large part what's gone before, because the main point I was going to pick out the report was exactly the same bullet point that Richard highlighted. That second bullet point on page 19, it seems to me to underpin everything we're saying. we're not performing well at the moment, and we need to get underneath that and understand why that is, and what the direction of travel is. So I echo, I think that's absolutely key. A lot of everything else feeds into that effectively, isn't it? But there are some headline figures there that we could usefully keep an eye on.
Look, any other questions or comments? Questions particularly on the report for Margaret and Joanne that we've not covered? Right, we'll pick up some of this. So I think some of the highlights I've picked out from what we it's about information about exclusions, impact of language, but I think that comes under the impacts of the curriculum on outcomes for our children, and then I think that leads into we do need a broad view of what's the outcomes for our children. And I think personally, the stuff about looking about the impacts on the disadvantaged group, there's an issue about the broad numbers of children, but also about the most disadvantaged and what we're doing to support. Right, thank you. Lovely. Right, I think that's fine. Item 8, work programme. Is everybody staying for? We'll stay in for that look at the work programme. Probably useful. I hope that some of it we've already covered. So I'll just knit together the two discussions we've had this morning and make sure that. Right, apologise. I'm working on two bits of Right. That's the there one. So that's. Right. So we are on page 25. Right. Right. We've got special educational needs to send out. That's going to be coming back to panel in September. It's Mandy Cameron's last meeting. So
Yeah.
So
She'll come with her successor as well, so there's
Fine.
continuity. Be an opportunity for Scrutiny to meet.
yeah, that's fine. Okay. Item 2 on the panel, exploitation. Sorry. Oh, the action. Right, fine. Yeah, so item 2 is on the exploitation strategy. We're going to be looking at the follow-up report on Dr. Peel's report of findings. I think, again, the conversation about this, it's recognising that child sexual exploitation, lots of companies, there's other forms of exploitation going on. The risk factors, again, not exclusively children in care, because you need to make sure parents aren't having a false sense of security about it. But that's probably the way forward. And actually, in terms of not having the same report coming to 3 different groups, it appears to be having that's actually for us to focus on that. It's broadened it a bit, but we're still looking at that. We're fine with that. Kirklees Children's Safeguarding Board. She's coming. Right. I agree. When we get people coming to the meetings, it's focusing on the things we need to do. So some of these panels are interested. Actually, I think if you want to go to any of these meetings and observe it, that's fine. But the point Paul's making about, I think what we need to do is focus on the effect. Is the board doing what it needs to be doing? And it's a part, and with any of these partnerships, is that interaction between partners doing what it needs to do? Do you want to come in? That's fine. So again, we might be interested in it, but our role is focusing on, is it working effectively? And if we've got an interest in it to help us in our decision making, then perhaps we can do a bit more interaction with that. So that's fine. Early support and partnership, education care, to hopefully to the plan in November. Again, were you at the textile centre?
I'm afraid I wasn't.
No.
But it's Michelle Wheatcroft who's the head of service reports to me.
Right, so again, there's a point there on that. So there's some really good stuff going on, but there were some concerns expressed at that meeting about we've got strategy in place, it's whether we've got the capacity to deliver some of that, but does link in with schools as community hubs as well, throughout school. So I think, and again, like some of the discussion about the council on Wednesday about fully supporting early interventions, is if there's a relevant resource there to do what it needs to be doing.
So I think I think that's why we think it's important for November. There is much resource, but it's been on a journey. We've been on an improvement journey. It's been on a journey. We've been able. I think it was really important because we've been working with an improvement partner, that making sure that we're reviewing that and that we're able to share that with yourselves in scrutiny. You're absolutely right. If there isn't the right capacity in the right areas, and I think if we've obviously identified there's some urgency to invest in something for our young people, youth provision. So that's why we wanted to bring you an update, because I think that it's being measured about that the areas of investment and making sure we're not duplicating and harnessing a collaborative approach, because it is a partnership. And it's not just about the council's resource, it's about our police colleagues, our health colleagues, a voluntary sector, and we're harnessing that so it's working smoothly.
Elective home education, I've spoken to Carol Burke now. I think what he said, the work is finished. They need just one more meeting to sign off on the report. Also spoken, Sheila did also give me a brief on that. So the Open Scrutiny Management Committee set it up as ad hoc again. Who's Amanda on? Who's got more have you done?
I'm not 100% sure because she was often that, but I
Yeah.
think it was the same people that were on the
Who was on last year?
Lisa Holmes,
Right.
I was on last year.
Dale.
Dale. You on the ad hoc for elective home?
Education. Did I make that up? No. She was not there.
So there's one more meeting of that. Request capital so we can just find a time when everybody all of them can get there, and then it'll come back to Pam just to sign off. Or just to what do we do?
We'll look at the findings.
No, the findings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just actually have to take it.
Right. Ofsted. Yeah, so the letter from the Ofsted Inspection for Children's Services, it was published before the August 23rd meeting. We've got that programme in. Again, using that as some of our scrutiny of the work of the improvement report. Learning outcomes and strategy. So I think we had quite a big discussion about this particular issue. It's about having over the next 12 months, 11 months, making sure we've got the information coming back in. That we need. I think lots of information, really good introduction from Harpreet, lots of it's again, us having the information we need to be able to check what's going on. I think what I would like to probably summarize that is actually it's a possibility to actually go out to some schools to actually and schools not where our children are or our just actually children's voice actually to speak, be interesting, if appropriate, to speak to some children, young people, and some staff about some of this, to get some qualitative information about what's going on.
I think that'd be really valuable, so that people can actually hear from a school perspective and what they are doing, because all too often we hear about sometimes what they're not doing. Actually, like I would say, there's some stunning work being undertaken with a rate on this, so I think our schools would welcome that.
I mean, given that most of us are new on the panel, sorry,
Yeah, I was going to say that one of the suggestions I made at the end of last year about this year's programme, that such visits, which I think are excellent, happen before we receive a report on that issue,
but
not afterwards.
visits before.
Would you need panels to have DBS checks to do that?
No,
Would be supervised.
no, because the children, you're going to be supervised once you're there. I would explain
So I
it.
think that's
I got it because my other stuff, but I was talking in general.
I think, probably have
There might be different views on that, but
it's not going to ask people now whether they have or not.
So
School governance would be useful for, and probably it's good practice for us to have an enhanced DBS.
I've only got a basic one, so.
Right, well, we might be able to make arrangements for. But in terms of the visit,
We'll just check out first.
you're fine because you're not unsupervised, you're with other groups of people. It's just good practice for those of us, particularly with children and people, but also adults as well.
So I think it leads on to wider discussion as councillors whether we all should be DBS checked.
Yeah, we've had a big discussion about that before. What we do need is a mechanism for it's why you're doing it. I think there's particular reasons for us to have one. We also need a mechanism for dealing with the implications of what comes back from the DBS, and that we've never been satisfied with those reports. Paul?
Just a quick on visits. I think we visit more than one school and have that comparator, because I think that would be really useful.
There's two things about it. It's about what was really useful about visiting social care frontline staff is getting some of the people that Elaine's talked about, get a really better idea of the interactions between all the staff. Again, in schools, actually, talking to schools about how talking to children about the impact, disruption on their learning as well, that children's voice stuff as well. So it is about getting some direct anecdote. Then it's not everything. It's the stuff that we all experience as parents and friends, to get an evidence that. CAMS, ongoing month after month reports about mental health for children and people and adults as well. So I think it's worth us having a watching brief on that. Some of these you might want me to deal with as chair on a more regular basis in briefings with.
Just on that one, is there any statistics about children who have severe issues like that? Have we got any statistics about children committing suicide or anything like that? Do we have that? We scrutinise that type of thing?
Really good quality data, and somebody will correct me, is the joint strategic, whatever the joint strategic needs assessment. So that there's been some really good longitudinal data on mental health and well-being amongst children over a long time. There's national statistics.
It's topical, isn't it? But I don't really understand whether this problem's going up or it's a problem that we're better understanding now.
In terms of scrutiny of that type of incident, the CDOT therefore the review panel scrutinised all deaths of children in the area, whatever those circumstances are, and that is about learning lessons and understanding.
And that's under the Children's Safeguarding Partnership, so there's information on that website. It might be helpful actually. Some of these, it's like you say, I don't know if you sort of reviewed that, but we can make sure you're included in from the Safeguarding Partnership circulation, where information, you can start getting a flow of information that you can dip into. But that's there's overview and scrutiny of it by the partnership.
Yeah, I think those statistics are. It's the underlying. So the stuff in the news this morning is about, yesterday was the increased referrals from primary age children all going through to mental health services. And this is all overlapping stuff, isn't it? Some of the work I know that's been done on really early intervention and prevention, preschool age children, but we don't always make those links all the way through. Is it possible an appropriate intervention at a much earlier stage would improve the outcomes of that child, reduce the impacts on the children? With some of the catastrophic, a child or any person taking their own life, isn't just a catastrophic impact on all those around them. And there's also.
So this is the one, isn't it?
Yeah.
What it doesn't do is it doesn't highlight how successful it's been in stopping that. You see the end result, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
What you might see is the cases where the disaster was prevented because of good work that's been going on.
Yeah. I don't think you do, but then that's where the overview, isn't it? Long-term trends need to come in. Okay. Item 9. Sorry, David.
I hate to add to what we have to do, but it says on outcomes that the panel are confident, convinced, assured, content, satisfied and clear. Now, I don't know whether Amanda will do, because she's the only person I know that's been on this panel before. By what mechanism do we record that we are satisfied, content, clear, assured, etc.? Because I can't remember anyone ever asking me, are you satisfied, content, assured on this particular issue? And I think that there should be a means of recording whether we are or not.
So subjective. I read the exact same thing, and the reason I didn't mention it is because I wasn't on it at the time. I thought if I hadn't been.
So we will look at, on each report, some sort of clear thing about how we get those things. So just repeat those, please. So it's satisfying.
Well,
This is the
I
key
just
words.
feel like they're all in the
Yeah.
outcomes, every single outcome.
Can we actually?
Yeah.
We've got. Is there some sort of
Yeah.
mechanism?
It's a wider issue, Andrew. It's a wider issue than that.
Yeah.
It's what it does is collectively speak for all of us. We're all going to have different views. You might be satisfied with it, but I might think it's absolutely hopeless. So we can't say that. We've 10 people with different views.
So, I think that's, yes we do. We scrutiny user come to consensus. If we're not all happy about something, then we're not, if we are all confident, we say that. If we're not, then that's expressed and we need to take that on board. I think that's what we all need to do. If there's things in the discussion, we all express our view and we try to, so if we're not all confident, then the panel's not confident, Richard. If we're not all confident, then the panel's not confident.
Okay.
We will put that down. We will not be, because, but the challenge to members is, having listened to what everybody's said, that's still my position. Yeah. That's the way it's supposed to go. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I've seen that. That's what I'm doing. Nigel Patrick was very good at this over the years. Right, if the whole panel, even when he didn't agree with other members of the panel, it was the panel view that was presented, and I've heard it, and that's the way I should do it as well.
I suppose, yes, I agree with you on summary. If it is consensus, majority consensus, but if someone who doesn't agree, like everybody in the panel, I get what you're saying.
We try not to.
I get what you're saying.
And what we do need to be careful about is we've all got relevant experience, and how does that fit in with what's happening with everybody, isn't it? And some of the individual experiences will be significant, and I know, Right. Children in care is a regular. I just think it's with the information that's coming through, we need to really make sure we get the information we need. It's not just someone, what is this telling us? And some stuff about care leavers, some of the placements, information. Same with performance information. Really good discussion about that. Again, the conversation with Mel makes about that is still ongoing issues with logic. Still doing data cleansing. We do need to make sure that staff, everybody's getting the information we need coming through. The visit to the various. Can we just look at the visits and just think which ones do we need to be doing and what purpose they're serving? Yeah. Because visit to the fostering team seems to be a good idea. Visit to do that. If Helen and I think about perhaps a programme of visits which should be used just for some discussion about today, because we are new, Dale's got this going to big input into what we might want to do.
I think most useful potentially comes on the back of the other state report.
Yeah.
So that identifies some priorities and we should tailor our visits to that.
Right. That is item 8. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. Next meeting is on the 23rd of August.
Can I give my apologies, please?
Yeah. Right. Hang on. Right. Before we all go then. Right, so Monday you're going to be.
I'll be on annual leave. I'll accept my apologies as well.
Richard, you're away.